The history of the Bund is in a sense a history of facelifts. The buildings that the foreigners put up were originally quite simple, but then they were reconstructed and expanded to become a symbol of Western power, exuding strength and solidity and wealth. It came into its own as a financial center in the 1920s and 30s with the development of modern banking and the reforms of the early Republican period. But why did the banks choose Shanghai rather than somewhere else in Asia? And how did this exceptional concentration of property along the waterfront acquire its present form? In October 1929, the New York stock market crashed. Over the next 2 weeks, $30 billion in wealth was wiped out. That may not sound much in today's money, but in those days it was an unbelievable sum, equal to all the money America had spent fighting the First World War. It was the start of the Great Depression. Factories closed, banks failed, workers lost their jobs, the economies of America's trade partners foundered. But not China. Chinese and Western researchers agree that the economic crisis, which started in the United States, reached China relatively late and had only a modest impact. At first sight, that seems surprising. Scholars explain it on monetarist grounds. The Great Depression caused the price of silver to plummet. As we've seen, until 1935, China was one of the few countries, indeed the only major one, to use silver to guarantee its currency. When the silver price fell, the Chinese dollar was effectively devalued. Chinese goods became cheaper and more competitive, exports increased, and living standards improved. And there's anecdotal evidence to support that. This is an American newsreel of Shanghai in the 1930s. It depicts China as a happy, fun-loving place where people enjoyed themselves, while back home in the United States, times were hard and there wasn't much to smile about. By 1934, 38 Chinese banks had their headquarters in Shanghai, 80% of the total for the whole country. There were branch offices in every province, but it was in Shanghai that the key decisions were made. The interest rates fixed here were applied everywhere in China, and the exchange rates and the gold and silver price were taken as references all over the Far East. Financial institutions like to cluster together. Wall Street is just 500 meters long. The British Financial Centre, the City of London, only 1 square mile. Both of them insignificant compared to the great metropolises around them, yet they touch every nerve of the world economy. The Bund is also 1 mile long, a rectangular block of land intersected by shopping streets stretching eastward from the river. Yet in East Asia in the 1930s, it played a role within the region comparable to those of London and New York on a global scale. Of those 38 banks with headquarters in Shanghai, 16 had premises on the Bund or nearby. 3 of the Chinese banks, which formed the core of the Chinese banking system, the Central Bank, the Bank of China, and the Communications Bank of China, and 12 foreign banks, among them HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, the Chartered Bank of India, and the Yokohama Specie Bank from Japan. In Zhejiang Road, there were exchanges of different kinds and more banks and insurance companies. In Beijing Road, there were 8 more. In Ningbo Road, as well as the Shanghai Commercial and Savings Bank, there were 9 trust and investment companies and more than 40 traditional private banks. And on Tianjin Road, 10 more banks. Everything seemed to be going well. The new Chinese banks that had emerged as a consequence of the revolution which had overthrown the Qing dynasty had absorbed the experience of their foreign counterparts and were now competing with them on equal terms. But a Chinese proverb says, "Be vigilant in times of peace, for war will surely follow." As the banking sector developed, it had been clear for some time that a proper system was needed for assessing loans. Already in the 1920s, the Bankers Association had proposed the creation of a joint credit investigation agency to monitor investments and credit ratings. But it wasn't until June 1932 that the agency, which was named the Bankers Cooperative Credit Service, was finally established. To head it, the Bankers Association appointed Jiang Naiqi, the deputy manager of the Zhejiang Industrial Bank, whose first task was to deal with the consequences of a new outbreak of fighting between China and Japan. You were saying there was a library here you used to consult.
Yes, the white one in 1932. It's just after the war. The war started, the anti-Japanese war started in the same year, but Shanghai was damaged by the bombing. And then the Chinese bankers worked together and they organized this credit service and they tried to loan to the people, loan to the businessmen, and then make the investigation to their credit.
So really two things, the Japanese attack and also the fact that Shanghai was becoming a bigger center for finance.
Yes, of course.
In the West at that time, credit ratings agencies adopted what they called the 3 C's standard: capital, capability, and character. The Bankers Cooperative Credit Service in Shanghai followed the same principle. And in fact, it remains the basis of credit investigation and risk determination in China to this day. Jiang Naiqi used to say that credit was like a skittish horse which had to be carefully managed. On the one hand, without it, finance would be impossible. On the other, if credit were given without proper guarantees, it would result in a financial bubble and ultimately the collapse of the securities industry. Which of course is exactly what happened in the United States in 2008, when the subprime crisis caused a worldwide financial meltdown. So Jiang Naiqi's cautionary words from the 1930s remain as relevant now as they were then. Jiang's good sense was shown very soon afterwards when, in 1934, China's largest family-owned business, the Rung family group, found itself confronting a credit crisis. The Rung brothers, Rung Zongjing and Rung Desheng, from the town of Wuxi, had started out in business by establishing a small private bank. By the 1930s, they owned 21 flour mills and textile mills and were dubbed the Flour King and Textile King of China. You could find the Rung family's Fuxin and Shunshin factories all over Shanghai. At this point, Rung Zongjing started making large investments in industry using credits and loans from several of the biggest banks. As collateral, he offered the fixed assets and supplies of the textile and flour mills. That meant that if he failed to meet the repayment schedule, the banks could seize his mills. In 1934, Rung Zongjing's son suffered huge losses in cotton speculation. At the same time, demand for textiles fell as a result of the world recession. The capital chain on which the family was relying was in danger of breaking. That summer, the value of Rung's textile mills was estimated at about 69 million yuan, while the debts totaled nearly 64 million. In other words, they were very close to bankruptcy.
Rung think about suicide. Then the Song Hanzang and the Cheng Guangfu, the two top banks, stayed up the whole night with him and make sure he didn't kill himself.
Whether from friendship or in order to make money, in the end the Bankers Association agreed to bail him out. They organized a consortium led by the Bank of China to take the Shenzhen factories into temporary receivership. The bankers advanced enough capital to enable the group to pay off its debts, supervised its day-to-day operations, and reformed the factory's management system to nurse them back to financial health. It took 2 years before the group was profitable again. In 1936, the international cotton market started to pick up and demand for textiles rebounded. The crisis finally passed, but it had been a close-run thing. During that time, the political situation had worsened. Jiang Naiqi had been arrested for his role in the anti-Japanese Salvation Front. He'd be remembered in China as one of the 7 gentlemen, the group of Shanghai intellectuals who urged Chiang Kai-shek to take a stand against Japanese aggression. As 1937 began, a new Bank of China building was rising on the Bund, a grandiose monument to Shanghai's role as a financial juggernaut. But before long, other factors would govern China's fate. The clouds of war were gathering. The storm was about to break.